Good morning. My name is Mike Taliaferro, and this is a part of a history class that's going on in the Beam Global Connect class. So I welcome you to this class. I'm actually filming this a second time, wanting to get it right. And we're going to be talking about the unity proposal today and the period of time in our movement in the ICOC churches between 2002 and 3 and 2012, but especially focusing in on 5, 6, and 7 and the unity proposal. I want to say greetings. Brigitte and I we are now retired. We were the lead evangelist and women's minister for the San Antonio church here, Mission Point Christian Church, but now we're retired and we're loving it. We're enjoying time with our grandchildren. The second grandchild just arrived a few weeks ago, and we're loving life. And we're heading to Africa next month. We're excited about that. We'll get to see some of you. The Johannesburg group will see you here in a few weeks in May. I'm recording this in 2024 here in April, but I'm very happy that so many Africans now and Brazilians as well. Bom dia a todos vocês de São Paulo. And I'm just so happy that so many now have come into. During COVID, I traveled up to Boston and I met with Doug Arthur, and I said, Doug, how about some other churches getting involved with Beam? Doug was super open and cooperative, and so now we have, besides Lagos, who's been involved with Beam for a long time, now other African churches have now joined in, as well as Brazil. So much good is coming from it. I've known Doug Arthur for 40 years. I appreciate him as a friend and his leadership in so many ways, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and I want to say thank you to Yannick and Valder and everybody that works with Beam, and for all the great things, all the school directors around the world. God bless you all. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing what's going on. Let's go back now to 2002 and a difficult time in our ministry. Kip and many of the world sector leaders and geographic sector leaders were actually stepping out of their jobs, and our movement was starting to break apart in 2002. The Bible says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 3, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Make every effort to keep unity. That's what we're going to talk about today, is to make every effort. Hopefully this is a story that will remind you to always make every effort to be united. Let's go back to 2002, as I said. In 2002, Bob and Pat Gimple and Alan Gloria Baird, who had been world sector leaders, called together a group of people in Philadelphia and basically put out on the table, things are moving and changing here. The winds of change are blowing in the ICOC. And let's try to imagine life in our churches. How would we organize ourselves without, Kip was now stepping out of his job, other leaders were stepping down. How are we going to advance the ball now? How can we organize? And so we met in Philadelphia in August of 2002, and this was a great idea. I really applaud the Bairds and the Gimples for the leadership that they provided. So we did a dry run. We did a first attempt to come together and to figure this out. And so the Bairds, the Gimples invited the Tollivers, the Greens, the Louis, Preston Shepherd, the Fontenot, the Uyghurs, etc. And I think that's who was there. And the question was, what principles would guide a worldwide movement of churches going forward from here? We recognize the individual local church, that it needed to be able to make its own decisions, and yet we needed to be connected to each other. We recognized that we had families of churches. We recognized we had young churches that needed help and guidance, older churches that had grown up and were mature, and but there was a need for a central something. We all agreed. What kind of governance would we have? Would there be some kind of kingdom council? We'd all lived under a form of structure where there was actually one guy in charge, and he was leading through a group of world sector leaders who had authority in the churches underneath them. But are we going to use that model going forward? It was a good question. And it was an excellent time in Philadelphia for a few days, and it was an exhausting time as we just kept batting the question around. But I feel like when we left, we had not quite solved the puzzle. It was so good that Bob and Pat and Al and Gloria had gotten us started up this mountain, but we hadn't solved the puzzle at this point. And I went home thinking, man, I need to read and I need to ponder this question, and I did. I went home and I did that. And I think a lesson coming out of Philadelphia is to anticipate problems that are in front of your church. Anticipate those problems and to begin to think about them and to be prepared and pray, because you can't always see what's coming down the road as a church leader, but you can anticipate, and you want to be on your watch for what is going to be facing the church in 6 months or a year. And so it was a good meeting, and I thank them for their call to anticipate. Let's get prepared. Fast forward 90 days, and now we're having a meeting in Long Beach, and Long Beach is in the Los Angeles area. And I believe it was the Bairds and the Kims who called this meeting in Long Beach, perhaps the Gimples as well. And so delegates now from around the world came to Long Beach, and we began to talk about the situation. At this point now, Kip had definitely resigned, and he came to Long Beach and he expressed his apologies for things that he had done wrong. And when we, and the meeting, it was all kind of staring us in the face. What are we going to do? We needed a plan going forward. And so we met, and we were each world sector, groups from each world sector were stepping up to present their plans, most of them along the lines of some kind of kingdom council, something like that, but to keep authority and submission a part of the plan going forward. And then the group that I was in, we brought up the idea of what about recognizing the autonomy of the individual church, but also stressing cooperation and collaboration as churches, recognizing our families of churches, but not having some kind of one overarching in-charge group for our movement around the world. The delegates liked that idea, and after much discussion and prayer, thought that's a great idea. So we actually voted to go with that idea and to go back to our churches and to think about this and talk about it, and that we wanted to come back together. This is us in Long Beach, November of 2002. We want to come back together, let's say in 6 months, to discuss it further. We would not be legally tied together, and we would not be submissive, one church necessarily, to running the show worldwide, but we would be connected and collaborative in our ministry. Let's come back in 6 months. That meeting never happened. So we all were about to break and head home, but we had a meeting there in Long Beach where the delegates were asked, how are you feeling? And this was in a large group setting, and myself and Mark Templer were emceeing this meeting, and we gave people a chance to speak about their feelings. Ooh, people were upset. The meeting went poorly. It was, you could say, our first open forum. And what we realized at this point was there's feelings in this room here. Wow, there's a lot of pent-up feelings from the way things went. And so a lot of people had feelings. And I think then, now we're going to all go home. And some people did not realize, oh, a lot of people have feelings back when you get back to your home church as well. And I think one lesson out of Long Beach was to always be watchful. How are you doing? How are you feeling? To be curious as a leader, to not just leave the door open for people to come to you when they feel stuff, but to actually be curious and to run and to go and to talk to people and be proactive. How are you feeling? Well, everyone went back to their home churches. As 2002 ended, some people began to work with their people and trying to imagine a new future. What would happen? How would we move ahead? Others just went home and did business as usual. We didn't realize that a clock was ticking. And we didn't realize Henry Crete wrote a letter which came out in February of 2003. I've known Henry for many, many years. Henry and the Cretes and the Taliaferros, we were discipleship partners in Africa for 5 years. I love Henry, and I consider Henry to be a friend. And so his letter was tough medicine for the ICOC. I don't believe that Henry meant to hurt the ICOC churches. He was writing and released this letter and released a whirlwind upon us all. Well, the letter came out, and the letter it described some of the criticisms that Henry had for the ICOC church around the world. And for us in Johannesburg, what we did was we had a choice. We could pretend that the letter didn't exist and just keep going, or no, we said what we're gonna do is we actually printed the letter up. We announced that Henry had written a letter, and we actually brought copies to church. If you want to read it, here it is. You can read it. We're not hiding it. And we began to express to the Johannesburg church our apologies, that we were sorry, that what we were going to do differently. And we kind of just, we knew that people might go, oh, this is an upsetting letter. Well, then let's talk about it. And we want to be open about, let's be open and talk and move on. And we were able to do that as best we could. I know some congregations just, in some places they kind of dismissed the letter. And then it got to the point where there was some anger in congregations. Some churches lost 50% or more of their membership. But around the world now, contributions began to drop in the American churches and internationally. And I was in my family. We were in Johannesburg, South Africa, and we got a call on a very dark Monday saying New York has no longer has the ability to support us. And, the administrative staff in New York were working so hard. But the bad news was we don't have the money to support you any longer over there. And things were falling apart. So many people got fired. They were fired because budgets were dropping fast. People were laid off. Missionaries were coming home. It was a very difficult time. I want to say, kudos to the African church leaders who stepped up and began to lead during this time as missionaries returned back to the United States. I do believe God was nudging Africa to be led entirely by Africans and people that called Africa home, and and they stepped up and they did a fantastic job continuing the work there. Their support from the United States dropped from $2 million to about $700,000. But in the midst of all this, they provided excellent leadership through it all. In Africa, we lost about 10% of our membership. Some churches were hit harder than others, but in Africa as a whole, we lost about 10% of our membership during this time. It hurt, but it could have been worse. And again, I salute the African church leaders for their hard work. And Brigitte and I, we began to interview in the United States. We waited about 6-7 months after the Crete letter came out. We stayed around hoping and trying to just work with the Johannesburg church and stabilizing it. And then we headed for home. It was a dark time. It was a difficult time with people dropping out of the ministry, budgets dropping, missionaries returning, memberships dropping from about 130,000 around the world to 88,000 is the drop in membership that took place. People were starting to say that the ICOC was finished. And if this were a Greek tragedy, this would be the end of Act 1. It just looks like everything's finished. And it did look it was a very discouraging time. And a lesson to take out of this moment here was there's always hope. There's always God. And God always has a plan. And you may feel like that's it. It's over. We're done. God always has a plan. hang in there. I know it may look really bad where you are. Hang in there. God has a plan. He wants to work in your life and in your church. Don't give up on the Lord. Don't give up on the Lord. So So we went to San Antonio, Texas, and I became the lead evangelist there. My wife, the women's ministry leader, and today women's minister. And appreciate so much the San Antonio church and their faith in us. We just got to work in San Antonio and pitched in. Greg Moretsky was leading the Dallas church and doing a great job leading the Texas family, Texas, Oklahoma, whatever family of churches, doing a great job. But we realized, we saw that we can't just sit by with all that is happening. I mean, we can't just sit by and focus on San Antonio. We're going to have to do something. Our first step forward was, we said, well, and maybe that's why Doug asked me to speak. I was the guy who proposed the first ILC, and I said, can we let's get the International Leadership Conference together again. And Greg said, hey, we got a building in Dallas and we can host it. And so that's what we did. We met in Dallas. One brother asked me, what right do I have to call a conference? And I said, I have the right to invite my friends to come and visit, don't I? Yes. And you can't argue with Mike's friends. And so Mike's friends became a running joke with folks. And so in 2003, October, about 400 people met in Dallas, with San Antonio co-hosting the event to restart the International Leadership Conference, get it back going after several years in 2003. And we were just desperately trying to hold it together. It was a terribly discouraging meeting. People would break down in tears as they were giving messages. We had one guy from Russia. He got up to give good news. We had good news sharing. And he got up and he said, when he got to the microphone, he said, I have no good news. And he went and he sat down. And we all just kind of looked at each other and went, this really is a different kind of meeting, isn't it? Some churches had literally melted down. But the important point was we came together. And so we insisted that somebody else host the event. We didn't want it to come back to Texas. We wanted to get more and more people involved. And so Chicago stepped up and said, we'd be happy to host this event. And so the following year, the event went to Chicago, and it was a lot more positive by then. And then in 2005, we were slated to go to Seattle. Building team meant not making Texas the center, not insisting that we're going to host it every year now in Texas. It really meant pulling everybody in to work together. And we weren't the only people working on this. Everybody was struggling with what are the next steps forward. But we just took some particular steps that God used. Family, remember this, family comes together. Even in tough times, not just in good times to celebrate, but we come together as a family in bad times. When we're hurting, one part of the body is there to help another part of the body. And when we're all hurting, it's just good to be together and encourage one another. It helps us to get together, and it helps us to be face to face with each other and to encourage each other during these times. Remember that when tough times come your way in the years to come. So in 2005, 2 years now later, by the time the next 2 years went by, that's when we had calmed down enough as churches and were unified enough to actually set up a structure to remain together. So that was going to come in 2005. But those were 2 dark years of bad news, 2003, 2004, 2005. Those were bad news years. Like I said, some were predicting confidently that the ICOC was finished. Well, we began to call meetings in San Antonio and ask church leaders across the U.S. to come on down. Once again, somebody said, what right do you have in San Antonio to ask church leaders to fly down there? And I said, I can ask my friends to come to Texas if I want to. And you really couldn't argue with that. Of course I could. Well, anyway, church leaders, we began to host meetings in San Antonio for church leaders, larger church leaders from across the country and some internationally. And let's all get together. Let's at least talk. We can talk. We can stay friends. We can see what you're doing. We can communicate. and we began to have meetings in Texas that were really helpful. This is from my perspective, and I know there were some other meetings going, but we definitely were pushing it down in Texas. And so the ILC took place, the Leadership Conference took place in 2004 in Chicago and in Seattle in 2005. It was at this point that some leader types began to think, well, you know what, we're going to jump ship, we're going to bail, we're going to start a new movement, and so we're going to jump ship. And a few left and said, we're going to start our own thing, and so they did, and they left. And but most stayed and fought for unity. Most people stayed and they fought for the cause. Personally, what went through my mind was when we planted all those churches, we were trying to plant churches all over the world in the 1990s, and we did. We planted churches. In Africa, 4 people died. That's very difficult. We asked people to go on a lot of church plantings. 4 people died. They died from health things or a traffic accident or whatever, but it was hard. And I thought to myself, I cannot go back to Africa and face those 4 families and tell them, hey, it kind of got tough, so I jumped ship and I'm starting another movement. I just couldn't do that. This was worth fighting for. The churches, the people, the principles that we were working under, they were worth fighting for. And most people did stay and fight for unity. We kept taking baby steps forward. And I would say, if all you can do is take baby steps, then take them. If that's your only option, then take it. Baby steps are better than nothing. And if you can take baby steps, little small steps forward, then do it. And by any means possible, make progress toward unity. So in 2005, we restarted the Campus and Teen Conference in San Antonio, and then the teen split off. It was spun off into the Youth and Family Conference, and these conferences were spinning off, and each time we formed a committee, and we wanted it to begin to meet elsewhere to get other people involved in this collective leadership, so more and more people were getting involved. By the time we got to 2005, now, I didn't know it then, but I mean, by the time we got to 2005, I think maybe we were ready to do something collectively again. John Louis called me, very excited. Los Angeles had proposed a unity proposal, and it was in 2005. But it was not accepted. It was a good effort. They made a good attempt, but it wasn't accepted. It was Los Angeles brothers that wrote it, but it didn't have enough collective buy-in, and there were some things that it needed shaping. So what happened was that at the Seattle conference, we said, all right, let's start over. What a great attempt, and I'm thankful for the LA brothers doing it. What a super step forward. Like I said, people everywhere were doing what they could to advance the cause of unity. But after the 2005 Seattle conference, we had a meeting, and there were 60 brothers who came together from churches across the country and other international churches as well. And so those 60 voted, we need a unity proposal, and we're going to ask 9 brothers to meet together and to actually write it. All right, so they voted in 9 brothers. I was one of those 9 brothers, and I volunteered to host. Hey guys, why don't we get together in Texas? And we gathered at Lake Travis in Texas in the fall of 2009. 9 of us came together. And so this is the guys who came together. Hopefully you can see that. I know it's not a great quality photograph. 9 brothers. Myself from San Antonio. Mike Fontenot was in Virginia at the time. Andy Fleming, I think, was in Russia. John Louis was in Singapore. Scott Green was in Seattle. Sam Powell, New York. Bruce Williams, Los Angeles. Steve Staten in Chicago. And Jeff Wong was in Hong Kong. The 9 of us got together in Texas in the fall of 2005 as 2005 was ending and the light was beginning to dawn. So the meeting at Lake Travis, here for the unity proposal went extremely well. We spent about the first 2 days just discussing and batting back and forth principles and where are we heading and praying about things and talking. I want you to remember, 4 of us had been in Philadelphia doing this before. Then 4 of the 9, most of the 9 were in Long Beach, and now here we are again. This will be the 3rd time. And so maybe this time God's going to move. You know, sometimes we make efforts and we think, I tried, I failed. You know, okay, but maybe there's some hope here. Maybe you can try again. Maybe you can learn from your mistakes and try again and do better and not give up. Let's have some faith here. Come on, we can do something. And, you know, the first 2 times didn't go well or went okay, but we needed to really put something together that would work. And I think this was now the time, it was the place, these were the people, and God bless the effort. So everybody had areas where they were interested in. I, of course, was still interested in the whole delegate system, the annual meetings we would have, the committees that would guide us forward. And so, and I had spent time studying the agreements of other denominations. What tips could we gather from the Baptist, the Southern Baptist Convention? What tips could we borrow from other churches? We wanted a document that would keep us together, that would keep us working together. We did not want one man in charge, except Jesus. We wanted plans and dreams and goals. We wanted to grow the movement worldwide, absolutely. We wanted to work together and be friends and unified without one church giving orders to all the others. The document ended up being 12 pages long. I wrote the part on the delegates and the governance aspect of it, and we departed with hope. We departed with hope that we'd put together a document where there was no one man or one church in charge, but that we can all come together cooperatively and move forward as a family, families of churches together. So cooperation and unity take time. And I think that's always a good lesson to remember. Consensus is a precious gift. And things usually go bad when one guy gets emotional and starts making decisions. Cooperation and unity take time and are important. You know, Roger Lamb was busy at the time trying to piece Disciples Today together and get it working. Bob and Pat were fighting for Hope Worldwide to survive. Kidogo was just getting started in 2007, reporting the news, trying to be a help to Roger Lamb and to Disciples Today. And Kidogo's still there helping Disciples Today and whatever. But that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to get off the ground. We established several committees early on as we got started. So we began an elders committee, the evangelist committee. There was a church growth committee, an elders committee, and a campus committee. And you can look up online at this, when all these committees came into place. But slowly, churches began to sign on and affirm the document and identify themselves as a part of this new ICOC working under the unity proposal. I was the first chairman for the meeting where we would have the committee chairs meet, and we would meet monthly and we would talk, and I was the first chairman. And then the second year it was Scott Green, and on we went, organized. The unity proposal structure was flexible enough to allow us all to stay together and work together. It was strict enough that congregations paused carefully before they signed on. We had some convictions doctrinally that we asked churches, do you share these convictions? But it provided a big tent for all of us. It also spelled out what we believed, and because doctrine matters, and it spelled it out, and it described our convictions. And it took 2 or 3 years to get everybody, or not everybody, but most people involved. There were constant conversations. Again, I want to say a lesson from this whole time period is that patience is so important. Collaboration and communication are difficult. Sometimes elders, we would invite people to look, if you can't join, how about come and be an observer? Just sit in the back and watch the meeting. And people would come and they'd go to a meeting and they'd watch and they'd go, oh, okay, you guys really are collaborating. You guys really are doing this and building a collaborative culture. Sometime and then they would join. But I remember one brother, he's okay, my church wants to join. And after a couple of months, he says, look, we should just make a deadline, get in or get out. And I said, man, it took you like 2 or 3 years to figure out if you wanted to be involved in this. And now you're wanting to, hey, draw a line. Let's continue to give people time. You know, it took some people, it took them as much as a decade to decide. And that's a small minority, but some people took a long time, and that's okay. Eventually, most everybody affirmed the document and came on in. And people would ask, well, do I have to sign anything? No, you don't. Just put your name up, your church up there at Disciples Today. Well, are there fees? No, there's no fees. Well, yeah, I mean, we're going to need a website. We're going to need to communicate. It does cost some money to get the family together or to be united. What if I don't like life under the cooperative agreement? What if I don't like this unity proposal thing? Well, you can leave. And okay. By the way, all the people that asked that question, they're still here. They're still here with us. So we all ended up coming and staying together. By 2012, God blessed us, and we were in San Antonio, and we were having our big World Discipleship Summit. 18,000 people worshiping God together, 4 nights in a row at the Sunday morning service at the AT&T Arena here in San Antonio. We'd come from not sure whether we could invite our friends just to come together to discuss the state of the movement, to 18,000 people worshiping together, dreaming of church plantings, and dreaming about a 2020 vision that was still and all that God would do in the upcoming decade. It was a beautiful time of change, and God worked in a wonderful way. Brothers and sisters, we need some of these qualities today that God describes in His Word: faith, cooperation, collaboration, patience. We need these qualities that will stick with it through the good times and the bad. It is worth it. It's worth sticking with it. It's worth the tears. It's worth the headaches. It's worth the stress. It's worth some of the gray hairs, and worth it to slog through the bad times to get back to the good times where we can advance the ball for the Lord. You will face this same thing in your ministry. You will face it. You will face crisis. You will face confusion. Will your generation keep us together? That'll be a question you'll answer in your ministry in the years to come. Unity is precious. Shame on the gossiper, the politician, the personally ambitious. No. Unity means we truly imitate Christ and die to self in all these areas. Another lesson is that our friendships are precious. Precious. When all else breaks down, we were still friends. I could still ask my friends to come and meet together. And when all else fails, we're still friends. And those friendships are precious, and they must be nurtured, watered, and cherished. We have a sacred responsibility to the people that we lead. Shame on the leader who wants to run off rogue and start his own thing or her own thing. No, you have a sacred responsibility to stay united. And that responsibility is to God and to the people in our churches that are trusting us to stay unified. And then when that unity, what does it allow us to do? It allows us to cast a vision. When When we lack faith, then there's no vision, and it's bad. But we can cast a vision from a united stance, and it's very powerful, and it's so important. We still want to go and plant. We still want to go water. We still want to harvest. We still want to win the world. Let's keep unity strong so that vision can be alive. And let's be committed to these principles of unity. Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed this. I know we're going to have a Q&A time on a Zoom call here in the next couple of weeks. But to anybody and everybody watching, God bless, keep safe, and thank you very much.